As I said, you are very welcome this afternoon to join us for this afternoon's Foundation Years online event. We'll be running this event between 2 o'clock and 4:15 at the latest. The slides will be shared in PDF form by email to those of you that booked your place today, and the recording link will be shared with you as if you need to dip out, if you lose connection, or indeed to share the contents of today's session with friends, family, or colleagues. So on the next slide is your welcome and introduction. My name is James Hempsall. I'm the Director of Hempsalls and I'm your chair for today's session. It's my job to welcome you, to make sure that our speakers work to time and to brief, and to support you to share your comments and questions to our speakers. This is a Teams meeting, but because of the numbers of people in today's session, you won't be able to speak and we won't be able to see you. So your cameras and microphones are switched off. But don't worry, you can contribute by putting comments and questions in the chat, and you can even email us as well during or after today's session. So I'll give you some details about that very shortly. So if you can't hear, well, actually, Sofian, if you could put a note in the chat for those people that some people finding it difficult to hear, ask them to unmute and mute, or leave and then join in. And I think that's the best IT advice we can give you. Is if you're having any connection problems, is to switch it off and switch it back on again. So let's think about why we are here in Foundation Years, and that's on the next slide. We are funded by the Department for Education, Foundation Years, and Foundation Years is delivered by Core and Family and Childcare and Hempsalls as partners for strategic engagement in early years. And it's our role to do these things. And Megan, my colleague from Family and Childcare, will say a little bit more about that later. And we're very keen to show you how you can get involved in the Foundation Years events and online and live events. And we're delighted today that DfE not only funding us, but they are joining us for today's session and will be outlining the EYFS consultation. So next slide, we're here to engage, we're here to connect, and we're here to support best practice. Up to 1,000 places were offered for this afternoon's session, which is an amazing number. We've had over 400 people book. And I will remind you that the session will be recorded and slides will be sent to you, and materials shared on the Foundation Years website as well. Broadly, our aims this afternoon are to share details on the EYFS consultation. We're here to look at the evidence informing best practice in PSED, and we will give an outline of new resources via our friends and colleagues at Ofsted, and give you an opportunity to discuss. So let's have a look at the agenda. This is how it all fits together. After this introduction from me, we will hear a brief introduction about the new era of Foundation Years under our partnership, how you can get involved. Then we'll move straight into the DfE spotlight on the consultation. That's a 45-minute session, after which there is another session, the evidence behind approaches to support PSED, personal, social and emotional development. And then we'll conclude with the newly launched resources for the sector to use from Wendy and Caroline at Ofsted, with questions and discussion at 3:50. So let's say more about that question and discussion session. On the next slide, you have a little bit more information there. This is a Teams meeting. And I don't know about you, but I've become accustomed to Teams meetings over the past 3 years, but rarely do them as big as these. But with potentially 400 people on this meeting, it's important that we use the platform properly. So it's the best option to use for up to 1,000 places, and to improve your user experience, we're making sure that you can only hear and see the speakers from today's session. That means that the background noise and the toing and froing is much easier for everybody. So you should be able to see the speakers when they put their cameras and hear them when their microphone comes on. So if that's not happening for you, do check your settings and rejoin if you need to. We do, though, very much encourage you to share your thoughts, your comments, and your questions, requests, and ideas throughout the session. So do use the chat function. You email us at FY, so that stands for Foundation Years, so fy@hempsels.com, and we'll be checking that inbox as well. So we'll be reviewing the comments and questions and putting those to all of our speakers on your behalf. And at the end of today's session, there'll be an online evaluation link, and you'll be able to feedback and make some further comments on that as well, of course, as participating in the EYFS consultation if you choose to do so afterwards, directly to DFE. Okay, right, let me introduce my colleague Megan Jarvie from Corn, who's going to say a little bit more about what we're aiming to achieve in the Foundation Years programme.
I am indeed. Thank you, James. So I'm Megan. I'm head of Core Family and Childcare, and it's been such a pleasure to work with all of you as part of Foundation Years and to see so many of you here today as well. What I'm going to do, as James just said, is talk through what Foundation Years is all about. It's that email that arrives in your inbox every now and then, probably, but there's a bit more to it than that as well. So Core Family and Childcare and Hempsels have come together to work with Department for Education as their engagement partner and to bring you all the strengths of the combination of those organisations. We all share a passion for the early years and working collaboratively with the sector to change young lives. And it's been really exciting to bring all those ideas together, and it definitely feels like something that's greater than the sum of our parts. And so let's go through what these plans actually look like for the rest of the year. Our approach is very much strengths-based. It's about recognising the immense knowledge and experience that sits within the early years foundation stage community and aims to provide a platform for this expertise. It's based on these three main elements: engaging, connecting, and sharing best practice. So what do we mean by that? So engagement is about a two-way dialogue where we discuss key topics, listen to different insights and respond meaningfully. So it's a place to share, to learn with others and to celebrate ideas. We're here to connect, so that's connecting you to the information that you want and need and in the way that works best for you. I'm going to talk through a number of the different ways that we communicate with you through Foundation Years, and we want you to help find the one that works best for you. And it's also about connecting with each other and with the people and the experiences that are really helpful for you in your roles. And we're here to share best practice. Foundation Years is a community of expertise and learning, and we want to facilitate the opportunities for you to hear about and celebrate fantastic work that's taking place. And so how do we aim to achieve that? We're going to provide you with all the news and updates on policy and practice. We know that things often move quite quickly, and it can be quite hard to stay on top of the latest evidence and examples of good practice for any policy change. We're trying to make that a bit easier. Doing that through online and face-to-face events like today, so you get the chance to hear about these updates and learn a bit more about them and discuss them in more depth. These events are here for engagements. That's both to hear about things and to be heard as well. We aim to make information easy to access. It's easy to get lost in the sea of evidence and information about early years. And we aim to make it as easy as possible for you to find the things that are most useful to you and the information that will help you make tangible improvements to practice. And we aim to support the community for the whole sector. So that's anyone working with the EYFS from the first day of studies throughout the career. We know it's a broad sector, and we want to celebrate the breadth of that sector in our approach to Foundation Years. Whatever setting you work in or with, or whether you work from your own home, whether you work directly with young children or supporting those that do, it's a broad community united by passion to bring the best to children. And the next slide shows just some of the different parts that make up that sector. It really is big, busy, diverse. And we know that needs and preferences are going to vary a lot in this varied sector, and we do our very best to meet these needs. So to give a bit more detail about our upcoming plans, we've done a lot so far, and we've got a lot more plans to do for the rest of the year. And we don't expect everyone to make use of everything we're doing, but we hope that by having this range, there's something there for everyone. So we're running events. It's our third online event, and we've held a face-to-face event in London and one in Birmingham as well. And then we've got 2 more coming up in the autumn in Manchester and Nottingham, and another online event as well. We try and run these at different times of the week or day and months to try and make it easier for you to attend around what else you're doing as well. And the content from these events will be available for the whole Foundation Years community, even if you're not able to attend. And one of the ways we do that is through our vodcasts and blogs. So these are used to spark new ideas about ways to improve practice with young children. Some of them are going to be providing updates on the latest evidence and policy and practice developments, but one of our key aims is to amplify the voice of the sector. And we want them to use them to document and share best practice and some of the fantastic things that are happening locally. So if you're doing something that you think would be beneficial for other people to know about, please let us know. We would love to hear about it and see whether there's a way that we can use Foundation Years to help your colleagues to learn from what you're doing as well. We've got the Foundation Year website, and that acts as a hub for storing all the information you need. We want that to be the go-to place for accessing all the documents and information you need for your role. And we've got some plans to do some improvement works to make that work a bit better. And we have 2 social media accounts, a Twitter and a Facebook accounts. And they're good ways, again, to stay up to date and to speak to colleagues, have a conversation, respond, see what you think, meet other people. You're probably most familiar with Foundation Years through our emails that land in your inbox quite regularly. We provide a monthly newsletter and then regular news flashes for things that come up between those newsletters that you think you want to know about straight away. We're trying to make these as engaging as possible and full of the information that you want to know. We're going to be adding to those with newsletter lives, where we'll have short discussions to bring some of those items to life. So we have a lot coming up and a lot of different ways of getting involved. Here are some of the details about how you can get involved on the next slide there, to make sure you don't miss out on anything that Foundation Years has to offer. And the last thing I would ask of you is one final request, is to spread the word. We know that this is a really useful platform, and so I really would ask you to pass it on for your colleagues as well. It might be that you find one bit of the platform useful and they find something else, so do let them know about the whole offer we have there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Megan. And let's now turn our attention to the business that we have. We've got 3 great speakers, and the first one that we have is the Department for Education. We're joined by Charlotte Stockton from DfE, who's going to take us through the early years foundation stage consultation on the regulatory changes. And I must alert everybody that actually Charlotte and with us is going to be running some poll questions towards the end of her presentation. So do be ready, willing and able to contribute to those poll questions. They will flash up on screen and we'll give you some multiple choice answers. Plus we'll be asking you to put some of those answers in the chat, and all will become clear when we get there. So good afternoon, Charlotte.
Thanks, James, and hi everyone. Great to see so many people here today. As James said, my name's Charlotte Stockton, and I'm the Early Years Foundation Stage Curriculum Policy Lead here at the Department for Education, where I've also been leading on the coordination of the live EWFS consultation. So thank you very much for your time today. And if we could move to my first slide, perfect, thank you. So on the 15th of March, then the government announced significant investment and transformative reforms to childcare. We committed to delivering flexibility for providers to help them to meet the ambition of the spring budget investment. That is why we announced that we would launch a consultation that looks at possible flexibilities that could be introduced to the EYFS while protecting quality and safety of settings. The proposals in the consultation aim to offer providers more flexibility, reduce known burdens, enable practitioners to provide high quality early education, and make it easier for practitioners to join the workforce and progress their careers. The proposals in this consultation have been informed by conversations with a wide range of stakeholders and early years providers. And now we want to hear whether these ideas that we have heard on visits and in meetings would benefit the wider sector. For example, we know that recruitment and retention of qualified staff is a key issue for the early years sector. That is why these These proposals include flexibilities around qualifications, including level 2. I think some settings have said that this made recruitment difficult for them. As the changes announced at the spring budget take shape, including the introduction of new funded entitlements, we want to work closely with the sector to ensure early years providers are ready and able to offer the new entitlements. We hope to hear from many people and organisations and gather a broad range of views on whether these changes will make a positive difference to providers and practitioners. This will help us reach our well-informed decisions and will shape the final set of changes that we'll make to the EYFS. So the consultation was launched on the 31st of May, and alongside the launch, the government also committed to a new recruitment campaign early next year to attract and retain talent and consider how to introduce new accelerated apprenticeship and degree apprenticeship routes so everyone from junior staff to senior leaders can easily move into a career in the sector. We will continue to prioritise quality and safety while exploring opportunities to remove burdens on settings and support providers. This work builds on the investment of up to £180 million in a package of training, qualifications, expert advice, guidance, and targeted support for the early years sector to support children's learning and recovery from the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. The recovery programme also includes the early years child development training, the professional development programme, and stronger practice hubs. However, to flag up front that this consultation we are discussing today will not reopen discussions on the changes made to the EYFS as part of the 2021 reforms, and this consultation does not propose significant changes to Section 1 or 2, which were the focus of the 2021 reforms. So, as it says on this slide, the consultation will be open for 8 weeks, closing on the 26th of July 2023. And the consultation can be found on the government Citizen Space platform. And a link is also on this slide here. When you go onto Citizen Space and explore the consultation, you will see that it has been separated into 3 sections by the changes that apply to all providers, group and school-based providers, and childminders. So while many people may wish to respond to all parts of the consultation, you can also choose to only respond to the parts that you feel are most relevant to you. And throughout the consultation, we have included free text boxes to give other suggestions and allow for comments alongside the closed questions, so we can hear your thoughts and ideas, including on cumulative impacts. So on the following slide, I'm going to set out some of the things that we're consulting on. And so some of the proposals in the consultation include 2 aligned versions of EYFS, one for childminders and one for group and school-based providers, moving the requirement from practitioners to hold the level 2 maths qualification to count in level 3 ratios to place this on managers instead, introducing a new experience-based route to achieving level 3 approved status, allowing students on placement to count within the ratios at the level below their level of study, reducing the percentage of level 2 qualified staff required in a setting from 50% or more to 30 or 40% or more, relaxing qualifications requirements outside of peak learning hours, introducing an early years qualification standard document as a new piece of statutory guidance, changing the requirement to support for English as an additional language from must to a should or a may, reviewing the requirement for childminders to undertake pre-registration training at the EYFS, and allowing childminders assistants to act as a key person where appropriate. If we could just stay on the last slide, yeah, thank you. So I now wanted to speak about some of the proposals in more detail. And the first one that I wanted to explain more fully is the proposal to introduce 2 provider-specific versions of the framework. So as you all will know, there is currently one EYFS framework for all types of provider, which covers a huge range of settings, including childminders, nurseries, preschools, reception classes, to name just a few. Sorry, I'm just going to clear my throat 1 second. Apologies. Always when you're speaking, you seem to get something in your throat, don't you? But yes, seeing as there's just one version of the EYFS framework for all types of providers at present, This means that not every requirement is relevant to every provider because of the differences between operating in a home-based setting versus a non-domestic premises. So, for example, different ratio requirements for childminders and group-based providers. We first announced that the DfE's intention to introduce a childminder specific framework in July 2022, so a year ago now. And since then, we've been working closely with the earlier sector to develop a package that will benefit all types of provider. In this consultation, we are proposing to introduce 2 aligned versions of the EYFS, one for childminders and one for group and school-based providers. By doing this, it is our intention to make the EYFS easier for all early years practitioners to navigate and implement. Both documents have been slimmed down and streamlined where possible by removing requirements not relevant to that provider to ensure that the content is targeted and straightforward. We've simplified language and reordered certain sections where we feel that this makes more sense. It is not our intention to alter parity between provider types. We know that this is vitally important. Everyone here is working towards the same aim of helping ensure that our youngest children get the best start in life and can thrive. I also wanted to talk about some of the flexibilities we are proposing to qualifications requirements. Our aim through these proposals is to enable settings to get the most out of their skilled and experienced staff. One element is the removal of the requirement for practitioners to hold level 2 maths qualification to count in the level 3 ratios. We have heard repeatedly from practitioners, setting managers, and stakeholder organisations that the introduction of this requirement in 2014 has caused real issues for some settings recruiting staff. Maths is obviously a vital skill for us all that we use every single day. However, the knowledge gained from a GCSE maths or equivalent won't necessarily set a practitioner up with the skills that they need to help young children develop those early math skills. Therefore, DF is proposing to move this requirement to managers who would be responsible for ensuring their staff have the right level of maths knowledge to effectively deliver the EYFS curriculum. The requirement for managers would apply to anyone entering a manager role. Managers already in post at the time that the regulatory train might be brought in would be exempt. However, they would still be required to obtain the relevant qualifications should they subsequently move to a different manager role. There would be a 2-year grace period to gain the qualification following appointment to a manager role. We want to hear from the sector whether this changing this requirement would be helpful, and we want to work with the sector to understand what level of maths is most appropriate for delivering a high quality early years provision. There are several things that we are already doing to boost maths skills in the sector, including strengthening the now new level 3 EYE criteria, making expert-led training on early maths available for up to 10,000 early years practitioners through phase 3 of the professional development programme, and we'll soon be launching an online math module in the early years online child development training. Another proposal in the qualification space is the introduction of a new experience-based route to achieving level 3 approved status. This new route would be available to practitioners holding a qualification identified as meeting most of the relevant level 3 early years educator criteria. We have heard from settings that existing routes to progression within an early years career can sometimes be a barrier to those practitioners who do not have the means or the time to undertake a more traditional level 3 pathway. As with the existing overseas adaptation route, candidates would meet the existing missing criteria by working in their setting whilst under the supervision of a senior member of staff. The manager would be required to submit evidence to the DfE that the missing criteria has been met in order for the practitioner to become approved to count in the ratio. Once approved, these practitioners would be eligible to count within the level 3 staff-child ratios, although they would not gain a formal qualification. This route would be available to practitioners holding an approved level 2 early years qualification who have sufficient experience in an early years setting, although it would be for the manager to judge whether an individual is sufficiently responsible and competent in order to make that progression. Another proposal is to relax qualifications requirements outside of peak hours. Currently, qualifications requirements span the full day. However, feedback from the sector has indicated that settings are stretching themselves to ensure they have sufficient staff with the right qualifications during early mornings and late afternoon periods, as well as core learning hours. We are proposing to change the qualification requirements for ratios so that those would not apply outside of peak working hours. For example, 8 till 10 in the morning and 4 till 6 in the afternoon. This means that while staff-child ratios, DBS, paediatric first aid and safety requirements would remain, staff would not need to hold the approved qualifications outside of peak hours. The aim of this change is to allow settings greater flexibility in how they use staff across the working day, including those whose working patterns fall outside of peak hours. By supporting settings to operate during these times, provision would also be more readily available to working parents. The final proposal I wanted to mention in a bit more detail is one to review the requirement for childminders to undertake pre-registration training in the EYFS. We know that some applicants will have existing knowledge or may prefer independent learning. We have heard anecdotally that a lot of childminders have previously worked in a group-based setting and so will know what they're doing. The new proposed requirement for applicants the new proposed requirement for applicants will be to demonstrate that they can understand and implement the EYFS will continue to be tested in the same way at the pre-registration visit. We are simply providing more flexibility about how you might acquire this knowledge. So now we can move to the next slide, where some poll questions will hopefully appear on your screens. So we'll be able to hear some of your views on some of those proposals we've just discussed.
Thanks, Charlotte. And you really do know the detail involved in here. And I know you're really keen to have rich consultation, not only through the formal process, but through today's event. And you attended our live event in Birmingham and have recorded a podcast with us on the consultation. So I don't think anybody can accuse you of not doing enough on consulting on these proposals. So let's go into the polls.
Brilliant. Thanks, James. So our first question we want to ask is, to what extent do you think the draft frameworks published alongside the consultation, if you've had a chance to see it, are easier to understand than the existing EYFS? Really keen to see your views on this.
We've got 207 people in the meeting. And I know that not everybody will join in on the polls. So I think once we get to about, 150 or so responses, that might be, you'll see when it slows down, when we'll have a conclusive result.
Yeah, I can still see it still ticking up slightly there. And of course, really recognise that not everyone might have engaged with the consultation yet. So you might not be able to know whether they're easier to understand, but would really encourage you to take a look if you haven't already and respond to the consultation. This is one of the questions in there as well. So we're really keen to get your views on this. Just give it a few more seconds to see, but it looks like we're maybe slowing down a bit there. Really interesting to see that 44% of viewers said it's slightly easier. I'll take easier as a positive overall, and quite a bit of people say no change or don't know as well. But not so many saying more difficult, which is really great to see. So thank you. And of course, our aim through this work is to make it easier to understand. So this is a really key question for me and the team here at DFE.
And I can see there's comments in the chat about quality and safety, and I know you're going to be asking questions about that later. So let's move on to question number 2.
Brilliant. So the next one is, do you agree with the proposal to remove the requirement for practitioners to hold a level 2 maths qualification to count within the level 3 staff to child ratios? And just to remind you, the proposal here is not to remove the requirement entirely, but it's to move it to the manager of the setting rather than all of the practitioners in order to count within level 3 staff child ratios. I think we were about 130 people responded last time, so I'll wait for similar numbers.
It's starting to be quite conclusive though, isn't it, Charlotte, on that one?
Yeah, definitely more conclusive than the first question, which is really interesting. Maybe got some. Perhaps it's easier to have a kind of a gut instinct with this one, without needing to see the documents as well.
And we've all been debating this maths requirement for 10 plus years as well. So I think it's something that's been well discussed up to this point, and I'm pleased to see that there's an opportunity here.
Yeah, it's really great to see that nearly 3/4 of people on this call, at least, are supporting this. You know, it's, as I mentioned in the presentation, all the ideas in the consultation come from conversations with the sector. But of course, there's only so many people that we've been able to speak to. So we really want to see whether it rings true with the rest of the sector. So interesting to see that 72% of people here, at least, feel that this one would be helpful. So thank you for that.
Okay. Number 3 then, I think.
Sounds good. So our third question, staying in that qualification space, is, do you agree that an experience-based route should be introduced that allows practitioners to gain approval to count within level 3 staff-child ratios following a period of supervised practice at their workplace? So again, I will wait for similar numbers to come in on this one. But yeah, this one kind of came from discussions and knowledge that there are so many very experienced practitioners in the sector, not always having the level 3 qualification, but people that, you know, really know their stuff, might have worked in the sector a really long time, but don't have the time perhaps to actually get that level 3 qualification.
I think from 30 years of working in this sector, I've met thousands of people who've entered the sector and working in the sector unqualified, and dare I say it, sometimes without intending to join the sector, me included. So I think we've all had personal experience of this sort of route into the sector, but of course it's a learning journey, and many become qualified at a high level throughout their careers whilst they're working. So it's an interesting reflection for me, I think, in terms of how people can learn whilst they're working under the supervision of some fantastic leaders and managers.
Absolutely. And I think one thing we really want to champion is the professional development of the entire sector and the opportunities for development as well. And I see that we're around that 130 mark again, and 70% of people agreeing with this one. A few more on the don't know side. We're dropping down, but we're around 70%. So again, not quite as strong as the maths question, but I think great to see so many people who are interested in this option, and perhaps a few people in the don't know that maybe want a bit more time to think about it.
So it's to bring that part of the workforce in and alongside the other parts of the workforce qualified at the various levels.
Absolutely.
Okay, shall we go to question 4?
Sounds good. So question 4 is about the proposal to remove qualification requirements for ratios outside of core hours while keeping staff child ratios, DBS, paediatric first aid and safety requirements. Simple question here. Do you agree with that? And I see immediately that this is a bit more of a on the no side, with already 83% of people saying no. And I think that we've heard concerns around this one, particularly around the different safety requirements and the fact that learning happens throughout the day. So it will be interesting maybe to see if some of those similar comments are reflected in the chat, or whether different things are being said. But yeah, it definitely feels like this one, people are feeling a little bit the opposite way towards.
Yes, that's a convincing majority of no against that. So the concerns there are about, of course, every experience of childcare or early years is a learning experience, and EYFS isn't part of an attendance or a day. It's the entirety of it. But I suppose it's about how would we as a sector reconcile that flexibility with actual high quality delivery at all times. So that's certainly a practice consideration, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think from the point of view the department was coming at it from, but of course the reason why we're consulting is to hear all views, is that the number of people there would not change. So from that safety and quality perspective, then there would still be the same number of people required to be there. It's just the qualifications that a bit more flex would be offered on. But really interesting to see people's views on that one. Thank you.
I'm sure that'll come up in discussion later. So let's
Absolutely.
question 5. I must say to everybody there are 8 questions in total, and we've got to number 5, so not too much further to go.
Yes, and thank you very much for engaging with these. I'll try not to take up too much longer. But yeah, out of the options listed here, then what do you think the expectation in the EYFS frameworks for all provider types should be in regards to how they support children whose home language is not English? So should it be that providers must take reasonable steps, should take reasonable steps, or may take reasonable steps to support a children's home language if they speak English as an additional language?
I suppose here you get the nuance between what must means and what should means, which of course is
Yes.
definitely DFE language there, Charlotte.
Yeah, I could definitely go into that. So the one that is at present is must. So that is a full legal requirement. Says what it does on the tin, I suppose. Like you need to do it. Should means reasons that you don't do it. So in most cases, it must still be done. However, there might be exceptions to that. So, for example, if you have a child that no one yet is able to speak the language of, that might be a reason why you not do it. May, on the other hand, has got no legal bearing, and that would mean that there is no requirement to do it, and the provider can choose themselves how they approach this. Interesting to see that we don't have any don't knows on this one. And that only 5% think may. I don't want to call it because it keeps moving between must and should, but
Yeah, there's an equal split there between must
yeah.
and should.
Yeah, which is really interesting. And of course, we recognise the importance of supporting children in their development of English and also communication and language across the board, whatever language that is in. And I think the reason why we were looking at this one was because we've heard from the sector that it can be at times really difficult to fulfill this, particularly in areas where there are children who speak many different languages at home, and that some flexibility might be of interest. But yeah, interesting to see where that one falls. I think that would be one to keep an eye on as responses come into the consultation itself.
Okay, let's take a look at question 6 then.
Great. So this is one where we're going to be asking you to put something in the chat as well. I know you already have been doing, but even more so. And it's, do you think any further changes should be made to the EYFS framework to provide greater flexibility to early years providers? So things that are not in the current consultation. Should we be looking at floor space requirements? Should we be looking at room leader requirements? Or do you think that we shouldn't be looking at anything else either? And as I say, if you answer yes, then please do pop it in the chat.
We'll see, we've got
Interestingly,
a
yeah.
little
Sorry.
typo and the don't know. It says don't know rather than know.
Interesting to see one pop up in the chat about outdoor learning requirements. Thinks about first change, clarity on childminder ratios. All really helpful feedback. Thank you very much. And again, quite split on the yes and the no on this one.
With almost half not so sure. I suppose it's a big question, isn't it? It's a big question about what those changes could be. So requires perhaps a little bit of preparation and forethought. So maybe that's one thing for people to take away. They will have an opportunity to present those ideas in the formal consultation, presumably.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is 3 text boxes in the consultation where, do you have any other ideas? Please let us know.
Okay, great. So that takes us to question 7 then.
So this one is again asking for input in the chat as well as in the poll. But are you concerned about the impact of any of these changes that may have on people with protected characteristics? So based on race, SEND, religion, and so forth. And if yes, then please do provide us some more information, including anything that you think that could mitigate these issues.
Yes, I suppose a yes isn't enough as an answer, is it? The yes needs to be backed up with what particularly is the issue that people are identifying on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, within the formal consultation, there is a question that asks this as well that we'd ask you to respond to should you feel that it is a yes and you're responding to the consultation. Interesting to see that around supporting English and English as additional language is coming up again in the chat a few times there.
Not entirely surprising that one, given that we've recently been asking a question about EAL.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
So they're strongly linked, those two questions, I think. So we're sort of settling in on about half yes, a third no, and a fifth don't know.
Brilliant. Thank you.
So that's the final multiple choice question, and your final question is on the slide.
Yes. So another one to pop in the chat, please. But how do you think that settings can ensure or would ensure quality and safety if any of these changes went ahead? And again, just re-emphasising that this is a consultation. Not all of these changes are going to all go ahead, it depends on the outcome of the consultation, what the final package is.
Okay, so that's an important question, isn't it? And I think it reflects many of the comments that we've already had in terms of how people think, well, actually, what would we need to do to ensure that there are no unintended consequences or that quality and safety was protected. So I'm sure we'll get lots of comments on that, and I would invite everybody to continue to make those comments. Not just now, but over the next few moments and minutes, because I know that Charlotte and colleague Jade will be looking at those very carefully during today's session whilst other speakers are presenting, and we can pick some of those up at the end. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
No, I will definitely be scrolling back up and reading through all of these comments. So thank you so much for inputting to them. But I will move on to wrap up with my presentation. So We don't take up all of the time today. So as I mentioned earlier in this presentation, and hopefully as reiterated over the course of it, we really want to hear whether these ideas that we've heard on visits and in meetings would benefit the wider sector. It may be the case that collectively you say that some of these proposals are not the right way forward. So working with an external organisation, we will analyse all the responses and we'll read all of the responses in order to build that final package of changes. After the consultation closes on the 26th of July, we're expecting to be able to publish the government response to the consultation in autumn 2023. And we are then aiming to bring in any changes resulting from this consultation to the EYFS in early 2024. Should any changes from this consultation should any of the proposals in this consultation result in change, we would want to work with the sector to be clear on what will be changing when, and more importantly, what is not. So you will know exactly which few elements of your operations you may need to review. And to do this, we'll utilise existing platform and channels like Foundation Years to deliver the messaging, as well as keeping stakeholders in the loop as to how they can help spread the word. It's also important to note that the vast majority of the EYFS is not in scope for change as part of this consultation. So, for example, there are no changes to educational programmes, so there'd be no need to review the curriculums you are all delivering as a result of this consultation. And furthermore, in a lot of cases, the proposed changes are optional. So we hope there are very few changes that settings will need to make, but settings may wish to take advantage of any flexibilities introduced. And alongside this work on the EYFS, we are continuing to focus on how we can support the sector in other ways. So this includes through introducing financial help for childminders through startup grants. The grant received will depend on whether they register with Ofsted, which would be £600, or a childminder agency, which would be £1,200. Exploring new flexibilities that would allow childminders more choice over how they operate. And we'll shortly be consulting on our proposed approach to distributing the funding for new entitlements to LAs from April 2024, along with the accompanying local rules for LAs to follow when passing this funding on to providers. So I wanted to say thank you again for your time today. I really hope it's been useful, and thank you for your engagement in those polls as well. I can see so many comments still coming in. I also hope that you'll want to engage with the consultation itself and that you get your views across there. And we'll have time for questions later in the Q&A session, as James said. So thank you again all so much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Charlotte, for representing the Department for Education this afternoon as well. That's much appreciated. And as I said earlier, we've been very grateful that you've attended today to do this session, but also very grateful that you attended our live event in Birmingham at the end of last month and did something very, very similar. Thank you to you and for the department for recording the vodcast that we shared through the Foundation Years mailing list very recently, which again looked at these proposals in a little bit more detail and discussed them and put people's questions to the department about the intent and the impact of these potential proposals. So we're very, very grateful. Thank you very much. So we've had a slot on policy this afternoon. We will be having a slot on resources before we finish, but in the middle of that, we have a slot on practice, and we do always, when we run a Foundation Years event, like to have a session that focuses on best practice or EYFS practice issues, and today is no exception. And the focus today is to look at the evidence that drives best practice in PSED, in personal, social and emotional development of children. And I'm delighted to introduce a colleague from the Education Endowment Foundation, Louise Jackson. Good afternoon, over to you.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. It's really nice to be part of this event, and particularly with so many people attending. I'm Louise Jackson. I'm an early years content specialist with the Education Endowment Foundation. The EEF, they're a charity that focus on evidence generation, evidence synthesis and evidence mobilisation. And our mission is to find the best teaching approaches to close the gap caused by socio-economic disadvantage. So the organisation is made up of researchers, programme leads, educators and early educators like myself, who work in partnership with also all, groups of schools in the Research School Network. But in the past year, EEF has been the evidence partner for the Stronger Practice Hubs programme, and so has been improving and expanding resources for the early years sector. So as an early years content specialist, my role over this past year has been to help with that dissemination and communication of the evidence and to make it accessible to the sector, across the sector. So I'm going to just show you the aims for the session this afternoon. I've included a lot of information in the slides, and I know I'm not going to have time to go through all the detail in that, but I think it's important that you have it. There are some useful links that you'll be able to use, but we're going to be able to go through some sources of credible evidence that you can access that are freely available for the early years sector. And then we're going to look at the informed recommendations, so that the body of evidence that sits behind some of the recommendations that we've included in some of those resources, and then how we're communicating that evidence across the early years networks. Okay, so in our next slide, I'll just show you there are 2 key resources for early years which are now available, and they enable early years educators to access robust evidence about PSED that is relevant and actionable. So there's the Early Years Toolkit and the Early Years Evidence Store. If you haven't seen the Early Years Toolkit, then I strongly recommend you do take a look. It's on the EEF website, freely available. It's a useful source of information which adds to your professional expertise. So it's not going to give you all the answers. It's not a one size fits all, but it will support your decision making, particularly when finances and time is limited. I can give you the evidence to help you prioritise how you spend your time and money, and helping you make decisions about which strands of practice are likely to have most impact for children, for all children, but also specifically for those who are disadvantaged. So in the Early Years Toolkit, and you'll see it on the next slide, very clearly you can see that approaches for PSED, or social emotional learning as it's called here, have a moderate impact for very low cost based on very limited evidence. So you can see in the Early Years Toolkit there's a little pound sign for the cost, a padlock which indicates the strength of the evidence, and then an indicator which shows you the impact, the relative impact against other strategies that you might use. And in the key findings, when we looked at the studies, we learned that there are multiple approaches that are beneficial for children. The studies show that recognising, expressing and regulating emotions, as well as developing children's ability to collaborate, negotiate and solve problems with others, are really important. They came up in all the studies that we were looking at. It's also, these approaches are particularly beneficial for children who are experiencing disadvantage. And when we think, if we have a child in mind, you can think about those children who may have missed out in their early childhood of all these sorts of things. So none of this will surprise you. It will be things that you're doing already, but having the evidence enables you to articulate why it's important, what you do and why you do it. Okay, but there is some caution needed. And with PSED, there is limited evidence to draw upon, and that's particularly around the younger end of the age group, but also around PSED, because obviously it's very difficult to measure. And so as EEF, that's a call to action for us to say we need to find more evidence. We need to look at more of the studies and to start to investigate that further. The second source of evidence is the evidence store, which has just been made available, is a live portal which is being developed by EEF with the support from the Stronger Practice Hubs. And if we go to the next slide, you'll be able to see what that looks like when you go online. Okay, there are currently 2 themes within the evidence store: communication and language, and personal, social and emotional development. So if you go to the store and click on personal, social and emotional development, you will get all the information that I'm talking about today. Just a word of warning, in the evidence store, don't be put off by the word teaching. We have used that, but you'll see from the exemplification videos and written vignettes that we understand that teaching looks different in the early years, and we exemplify teaching right across. We see it as the interactions that adults are having with children. And in the evidence store, we were really focusing on what interactions adults are having across that pedagogical continuum. So in guided play, in child-initiated play, and also in more adult-directed scenarios. So we've tried to exemplify that right the way across the different settings and situations that you might be involved with. So the evidence store has been created with input from the early years specialists, and we've collated all the studies and research that met that criteria to identify the approaches, which are the ways educators seek to improve a particular outcome. So when you go into the evidence store, you will see approaches, and then we've identified the practices that we think are typical ways to deliver that approach. So like the toolkit, the evidence store draws on research to offer evidence-based conclusions. So these 2 resources, you can work together. The early years toolkit acts as a gateway to a broad evidence base for a given theme. And then the early years evidence store goes into greater detail regarding the types of strategies supported by the evidence. So you'll see those approaches that are evidence-based, and then you'll see the practices that will help you implement that. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. Okay, and you'll just see from this layout, so you have the theme and then the approaches and the practices. So that's how the evidence store is laid out. And if we go to the next slide again, I can give you an example of the exemplification that you might see within the evidence store. So there are 3 films, at least 3 films, showing what the approach might look like in different settings and with different age groups. And those exemplification films have been taken in real settings. They're observational films. They weren't set up, but we wanted to test the evidence to see if the evidence matched what we were seeing in practice. And so you'll see those 3 films. You'll see a list of practices that might be used to implement the approach. And then those are exemplified in short spotlight videos and written scenarios so that you can view the practices in action. Okay, so let's focus on PSED. If we go to the next slide, you'll see there are 5 approaches which are what we call best bets. So that means they're approaches that we found from looking at all the research and studies that we looked at had a body of evidence. And we'll just go through so that you can read those 5 approaches: teaching and awareness of emotions and feelings, teaching and modelling how to manage emotions and feelings, teaching and modelling social communication, teaching relationship skills, and teaching how to sustain positive relationships. Now, we had 2 further approaches: promoting self-care and teaching children to self-regulate, which we know are really important approaches for PSED. But when we looked into the evidence sitting behind it, we felt that there wasn't enough in order to exemplify that. So our research team have gone away and they're looking at further reviews of the research, and also organising further research that we can put into those approaches so that before they're published. So those will be added shortly. Actually, we're working on them now, so they should be added fairly soon. Okay, so moving on. Though I'm going to go through just each of those approaches, the evidence that sits behind it, and then just signpost you to some of the exemplification. So we need to be teaching children to notice and connect their reactions and responses to their feelings and emotions. So we're helping them by giving a shared language in which to talk about that. So giving children vocabulary to enable them to talk about their feelings in context is really important. And the evidence shows that this approach is beneficial for children as young as 2. So we found studies where this was happening with very, very young children. We also found that it was particularly important for those children who were experiencing more stress or less support at home. So we think that this, has a really strong evidence base, and we've exemplified it and added the practices that we think will help you to implement that within your settings. Now, those will be very familiar practices. So if we go to the next slide, you can see the practices on the side. So labelling emotions and feelings, providing opportunities to discuss those emotions and feelings, and creating that culture within your early years setting. Creating opportunities where you can explain emotions and feelings, giving clarification or justification for a particular action or belief. And then scaffolding children's reflections on emotive events. And we have films where we show how practitioners were doing that within early years settings. So sometimes that was using storybooks, puppets. In the role play, we found the role play was particularly relevant for much younger children who were talking about feelings. And then when you see those approaches in action, you can then go into more detail and see the spotlight films, which pick out each of those practices where the adult was labelling emotions and feelings, where they had encouraged them to encourage children to discuss those emotions and feelings. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, teaching and modelling managing emotions and feelings. So this is about those turn-taking interactions that take place alongside an incident or event. They really matter. This is co-regulation, moving alongside, getting down to a child's level and talking about what just happened and why. So they're really in the moment when you're trying to do this kind of teaching and being very responsive to what's happening in the moment. And educators model how to respond to different emotions, talking through situations in context, And then, as I said, again, using puppets, stories and small world scenarios. And in that, you're able to give children, young children, strategies to overcome strong emotions. So supporting them with different techniques that they can then apply in their own lives. So if we look at the list of practices linked to that, you can see we've got about scaffolding children's reflection on emotive events, modelling how to manage emotions, providing techniques, reminding children of times to employ those techniques to manage strong feelings. So you're almost anticipating if a child becomes dysregulated or upset or distressed, that you're anticipating that and coming in and reminding them of a technique that they may be able to use that's going to help them. And scaffolding those opportunities to manage strong feelings. And when we went out and filmed those approaches in action, we saw all sorts of situations. We've got one around a Play-Doh table and a group of children who are struggling to share the Play-Doh between them, and the adult comes in and supports them in that scenario. We've got another film, we called it Lunchtime Worries, but it was really over a sausage roll that the child did not want to eat, and how the adult supported the child through those strong feelings that were really important for the child, rather than just dismissing them. And then we have some outdoor learning as well. So in a PBI nursery, obstacle courses, and the way that the practitioner was teaching children through their play and through those interactions. Okay, the third approach is teaching and modelling social communication. So the child is taught to notice body language, spoken words, and how to listen and respond in socially appropriate ways. And showing children good examples of social communication and following this up with conversations to help them to understand and follow the rules of good social communication were really important. So when you're setting up games, you're setting up activities with a child, you start by establishing a code of conduct, a code of rules, and that conversation that you're having is going to really support them in doing that. And so the list of practices that goes alongside teaching and modelling social communication, if we move on to the next slide, you can see about encouraging children, demonstrating that non-verbal communication and how important that is, and how we interpret non-verbal communication in different ways, helping children to take turns, anticipate and wait for your turn in a game, all really important teaching in the early years. Body positioning, modelling and teaching how physical posture, gestures and signs, the way we support good sitting, good looking, good listening in different ways, and it becomes a habit. Providing opportunities to consider appropriate non-verbal communication, so highlighting when you see other children using it effectively and drawing attention to that within the setting and within the play. In our approaches, when we went out to video exemplification for that, we found it was particularly strong in specialist settings. So one of the approaches is in action has been taken in a specialist setting. We've also got an example from a fantastic childminder who had a mixed age group of children, and how she was promoting that social communication within her outdoor area. And you'll see again those practices spotlighted both in written vignettes, written scenarios, and also in the written in the spotlight films. Okay, and moving on to number 4. So teaching relationship skills. When positive interactions are modelled by educators and other children, there is evidence that a child learns the features of good relationships. So what we do and how we behave with each other and how the children behave with each other, the relationships that they have, children are watching all the time and learning. And so, you know, the evidence tells us, we know because we see it in our everyday practice, but this is really important for teaching relationship skills. So when you think about group activities and collaborative play, there are lots of opportunities for demonstrating how those relationships work and the advantages of working together and building strong relationships. When we looked at the evidence for this, we also found that there was a lot of evidence to say involving parents in this was in the settings approach and making sure that you communicate your approach across with your parents and carers, that also helped, because obviously then the child is having a consistent approach both in the setting and also at home, and it's helping parents to see as well how important those relationships are and what children are seeing is what they're learning. So moving on, we can see the list of practices that goes alongside relationship skills. So making time to reflect with children on the impact of their words and actions on others, and drawing attention to the ways those words and actions impact on each other. Providing lots of opportunities for children to develop connections and relationships with one another. So planning the physical space and using teaching styles that promote opportunities for peer-to-peer interactions, for group work, for children to connect and build relationships. Making sure that you're exploring unique qualities, different preferences, similarities and differences within the setting, so that children notice others, but also develop a sense of identity and a sense of belonging, teaching children that their opinion matters and that they have agency within the group and community. Another practice that we thought was really important here was around help seeking, scaffolding appropriate identification of when to ask others for help and how to ask for help, and promoting that independence, but creating opportunities where children may need to ask for help and can say no if they don't want help. Explaining the importance and advantages of working cooperatively together. And there were different ways that people were doing that when we went out into settings. So again, using books, really powerful. There's such a fantastic wealth of books that support PSED, but we know from the evidence that this is really powerful and has impact. So that's exactly what you need to be doing. We also saw from the films that we collected, there's connecting through movement, connecting through massage, and then also times where adults were sitting and eating lunch together. So those routines and rhythms of the day. And we captured a very, very young child's, a baby's first day in nursery, and how the practitioner was connecting and building relationship with that very young baby, and how that would impact on the child's experience and personal, social, emotional development within the setting. So you can see those films if you go into the evidence store, and you'll be able to click on them and use those. Okay, and finally, once you've taught relationship skills, there's something about sustaining relationships. So teaching how to sustain positive relationships. Now this is around teaching children to adapt. We want children to be assertive, but also be able to change their behaviours to promote effective collaboration in different situations. So providing children with opportunities for social problem solving supports that development of peer relationships, and we found that in some of the research and the studies that we were looking at. There were lots of interventions where we saw children learning how to negotiate and collaborate during play, including in role play, turn-taking games, and tasks where there is a problem to solve or a shared goal. And the adults were using that language of encouragement all the time. So that's really important to think about the language and the interactions that the adults having during those experiences. Scaffolding peer interactions through dialogue prompts and providing example scenarios as well through puppets and stories, and we saw lots of use of puppets in this way to help children to think and talk about how they might sustain a positive relationship in different situations. And so the practices that we saw, if we move on to the next slide. There we are. So again, some practices that you can see where you might do that. So providing a repertoire of strategies to minimise and resolve conflict, providing a shared language where children are able to express themselves and their needs, including in times of conflict. So it's giving children time to think deeply about an incident or an event, and encouraging them to recall and reflect and talk about the different responses and during different times of conflict or different situations. Providing opportunities for children to make appropriate choices about their actions and responses. So teaching that decision making about, which response is appropriate in this situation. And what do children think, exploring what they think, providing lots of opportunities to collaborate with each other, and also encouraging children to be caring and responsible individuals. So you're developing that culture of belonging to a group. And we saw lots of examples of this across the pedagogical continuum. So you saw adults who were leading a circle time and songs with very young children, but we also saw it in the block play, and we saw the childminder using it within their setting. So, okay, and if we can just move on.
I think you're just about wrapping up now, aren't you, Louise?
Yeah, that's fine. This is my last two slides. So just to say that we're communicating this evidence through the Stronger Practice Hubs, and I would encourage you, if you haven't been in contact with your Stronger Practice Hub nearby, it's worth getting involved, finding out where they are and whether you can link up with them. They will be communicating the evidence as we publish it. And also, just if we go on to the next slide, just to wrap up and say, we do have recommendations poster which summarises this, and I've put a link to that so you can access that summary of the personal, social, emotional development in the early years. You can go into the evidence store and the early years toolkit via the EEF website, and we'd encourage you as well to sign up for any updates, but we'll obviously be communicating those through the foundation years as well, so their newsletters and things. So we will keep you updated. You'll see new themes coming into the evidence store. We've got mental health in early years, got self-regulation coming, and physical development coming soon. So please do take a look at these resources. I've put my email address on the front slide, so do contact me if you've got further questions or need further information. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you, Louise. It occurs to me that all we hear since the pandemic is the effects of the pandemic on children's PSED, particularly their emotional development. Their experiences have of the pandemic have been through their entire lives, and some children have had certainly much fewer opportunities to develop their emotional development than they might have done without the pandemic. So comes really, really at a great time. So thank you, Louise. Stay on the line. There may be some questions or comments that we want to pick up later, but it's now my pleasure to friends and colleagues from Ofsted, and we have Wendy Ratcliffe and Caroline Hearn speaking new to give us an overview of the newly launched resources from Ofsted. So definitely a resource rich session this afternoon, both. So welcome, and over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. Yeah, and we're absolutely delighted to be here for this online event today. And as James and Megan were mentioning earlier, we joined them in Birmingham. Was it a couple of weeks ago, I think, Caroline, now, wasn't it?
Yeah, it must have been, yeah.
Yeah, and for a face-to-face event. And, you know, these events are really so valuable so that we get that opportunity to hear from you, engage with you outside of inspection, have those opportunities to ask questions that are not part of an inspection, if that makes sense, and to listen and to respond. So my name's Wendy Ratcliffe. I'm one of His Majesty's Inspectors, and I'm Principal Officer for our Early Education Policy at Ofsted. So in essence, that means my team hold the pen on the education inspection framework, that early years handbook that our inspectors use when they come and inspect in your registered early years provision, as well as the early years element in the schools inspection as well. And Caroline, do you want to just do an intro?
Yeah, of course. So Caroline Hearn, I'm the Specialist Advisor for Early Years Regulatory Policy over at Ofsted. So my team looking at all things registration, regulatory, so the visits in between inspections when they're needed, but really a strong registration focus. I'll be coming back to some slides about that in a bit.
Yeah,
but hand back to Wendy.
So we look at it as a bit of a double act. I'm inspection, Caroline's regulation, but obviously we work very closely together. So yeah, so today's session, the session we did face to face when we were with colleagues in Birmingham, was very much looking at some of the messages we had around our curriculum roadshows, and why we say do nothing when asked that question around what do I need to do to prepare for my inspection, because if you're doing what's right for your children, you're doing what's right for Ofsted. So today, though, as James has just said, we want to just spend some time focusing in on some of the resources that we've got available that our teams have been working on to try and I guess dispel some of those misconceptions that potentially are out there, and to add clarity when we get asked various questions. So sorry, yes, so if we could move on to that next slide. Okay, so one of the things we obviously do have is we do have our early years inspection handbook that is published, and everything that our inspectors do is published on the website. So there's that transparency there. There is no secret guidance that our inspectors have got in terms of what they do when they come and do your inspection. But on top of that, you've also got this page that the team have produced. And this is about guidance about what EY providers and practitioners need to know. Not a very snappy title, but basically it's those frequently asked questions that we've provided some clarity about. Now, this page is divided into 3 sections because we know, of course, that early years in England takes place in different places. So there's a page for if you're providing EYFS in schools. There's a page if you're a childminder and you're working on your own in those, much smaller numbers. And then there's a page for what do I need to know if I am in a day nursery or in a preschool. So yeah, so those, have a look at those. We hope that they're helpful. We do look at them often to refresh them. We've been looking at them more recently, and I'll come to hot off the press stuff later. But again, just there's something there. If there is anything that you feel we could cover on that, we're always keen to hear from you. So let's just have a look at some of the questions that do come up on that page So if we can just go to the next one. So yeah, so for example, what should I expect from the learning walk? So that's answered in the different pages, in the different slots. But actually, importantly, if you're a childminder, a learning walk's more of a learning sit, really, isn't it? I've got visions of inspectors pacing the living room. But actually, you know, we want to be really clear that it's that conversation with leaders, whether that's you as a childminder or whether that's you as a leader or manager in a setting, how you organise your EYFS curriculum. What is it that you want your children to be able to do and know by the time they leave you in order to be ready to move on? So the curriculum, and then we'll be talking about how you as a setting implement that curriculum through that particular teaching or pedagogy that you choose to have. So that's one of the frequently asked questions. And then another one is around how should I store my paperwork in a folder marked Ofsted? And hopefully I can't hear because you're all on mute, but hopefully people are going, no, we don't need to do that, because no, absolutely you don't need to do that. Inspection isn't about the inspector calling and then you reaching up to get that folder off the shelf, dust it off because it's got Ofsted written down the spine. The only paperwork that you need to keep is the paperwork that's required by the early years foundation stage. And I think as well, you know, one of the things that we try to bust that myth around as well is that when we're talking about, we talk a lot about in our external engagements about curriculum planning, but when we're talking about curriculum planning, what we're actually talking about is that thinking that you've done. We don't require you to write that down. You may choose to write it down because you're working in a 100-place day nursery, for example, and you want everybody to be on the same page and to understand what it is that you want your children to learn and how you're going to go about that. But actually, if you're a childminder, why would you write it down? But essentially what we're saying is don't write it down for Ofsted. Another question there is around how will inspectors consider the progress children make at my setting? And again, that goes back to some of those things we were really thinking about when we introduced the education inspection framework back in September 2019, ahead of the pandemic. We recognise that there's been that whole industry that developed around the collection of assessment data, and you know, driven by outcomes for children. And very much the way we consider progress children make at your setting will be through those observations and discussions with you, your staff, parents, and with children themselves. What is it that you want your children to be able to do by the time they leave the toddler room, for example, before they're ready to move into the preschool room? And if that is about, you know, gaining independence, those independent skills and being able to put their own coats on, well, children would have made progress, and we'll see that curriculum in action when actually children are rushing off to get ready to go outside. They pick their coat up and do that flippy thing with their arms, and hey presto, they've got the coat on and off they go. Well, that is children making progress. Children make progress through knowing more and remembering more. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, so something else that is out there as well, feels like we've been really busy, is we have an Ofsted early years blog page. And this page is where we've picked on particular subjects that we've heard from the sector or we've heard from our inspectors about that may be causing confusion or of particular interest. And again, we're going to look at some of those examples, I believe, on the next slide. So if we click once, yep, let's stop on this one for a moment. So here's one around what do I need to do to prepare for my early years inspection? Well, basically, this says do nothing to prepare for your early years inspection. Have the confidence to do what you do every day and don't do anything different just because the inspector calls. I think good one to share with the staff working in your setting. We know people get nervous on inspection, and we know sometimes that staff feel like a bit like, oh, rabbit in headlights when they get asked a question by an Ofsted inspector, but we really want to kind of like, you know, reassure people that actually inspection is not a memory test. So for example, if an inspector's asking a key person about a particular child and they want to refer to some kind of document that they might keep, then they can refer to it. Our inspectors won't ask to see it, but you know, it's not a memory test. The other thing to say is if when a member of staff's asked a question and they think, oh, my mind's gone blank, and actually afterwards they think, oh, I do wish I'd told the inspector this or that, then please encourage them to come back and find us. We do want to hear from staff, and yeah, please come and tell us what it is that you think you've forgotten to tell us. Let's click one more time and see what the next one is. Okay, so yes, this one is all around, this is Lee Alston, our Deputy Director for Schools and Early Education Policy, and also championing our Best Start in Life strategic priority that we've got for the next 5 years that we're particularly excited about. So it tells you a little bit in there about some of the research reviews that we're doing. Best Start in Life Part 1 that sets the scene. Also talks a little bit about the evidence that we want to build in terms of being helpful for the sector, replicating building the evidence similar to what they've done in the schools space. So that early years practitioners can have somewhere to go, something that's easy to navigate and focuses in on, in the first instance, birth to 4, so pre-reception, so that those working with our youngest children, pre-reception children, don't have to work out which bit applies to me and which bit doesn't. We've started there because the school's research covers reception, but we'll come back to it later. So we're not leaving it out. We know EYFS covers birth to the end of reception. And the next one. There's one more click. We should have one more. Okay, and this one is a blog about our early years curriculum roadshows that we've been doing. So since last summer, we've been on the road and done a number of curriculum roadshows based on communication and language. They build on the training that we've given our inspectors around communication and language. They look at why communication and language is important, a curriculum for communication and language, how children make progress in communication and language, and then how we inspect communication and language and look at it on inspection. So again, and we're really pleased with some of the impact and some of the feedback that we've had from those roadshows. Just a few more to do at the end of this term. I think we're in Kent tomorrow, and then we've got Bristol next week, and then that will be the end of the curriculum communication and language focus, and then we will record some of those over the summer so that they're accessible online. Okay, I think, am I taking too long? Next one, it's nearly your turn, Caroline. Okay, so again, and this one is the other thing that we've produced is some guides for parents. And again, we've worked with sector organisations to help us with these guides. So potentially somewhere where, you know, you get the call to say, oh, Ofsted's coming to inspect, then then you can direct your parents to actually, what does this mean? What does that look like? So hopefully they're helpful guides for you to share with your parents. So there's one for childminders, and if we click again, there's one there for, this is very clever, I don't know who did it, it wasn't me who put these together. There's one there for nurseries and other types of daycare, and then if we click one more time, there's one there for before and after school care and holiday provision. Just to say, these are very much for those who are registered on the early years register, so for our youngest children, but all of those inspections we inspect in using the education inspection framework, but it's just to make those slight differences clear about what happens in those inspections, but they are all using the education inspection framework. Okay, so final slide from me before I hand over to Caroline, and this is hot off the press. We will, and we'll share these links with you. We're looking to share 3 short videos, films on our YouTube channel. Fingers crossed they'll be going out tomorrow. And we're keen to see whether these are helpful or not. We have engaged with focus groups and with some of our stakeholders in terms of is this information useful? So they are very much 3 short films answering those key questions. So there's going to be one around, is the notification call the start of the inspection? Should I store my paperwork in a folder marked Ofsted? Hopefully you should know the answers to that one. And what should I expect from the learning walk? And you know, we're keen to hear from you about whether they're useful, and then we'll look to build on that resource so that we've got a particular bank just to, yeah, hopefully be helpful. Caroline, I'll hand over to you, shall I?
Yeah, no, that'd be great. Thank you. Yeah, those video clips are really good. Really like them. Nice and snappy and just something you can easily access. So, okay, can we move on to the next slide? So I was unsure what to come and talk to you about today, really, and really got my inspiration from the last event in Birmingham when people asked me about registration. So I was asked a couple of questions about people acquiring more settings, expanding, just all the kind of minutiae of registration. So I've put a few slides here together just to walk through that. So very much in the vein of what Wendy's been talking about with our web pages. This page, we've taken all our registrations for any provider type. You'll see a great list of provider types there, and it walks you through each stage. So what you'd need to do if you're a childminder registering, if you're a daycare, if you're preschool, which registers you might want to be on. Do you want to be on the voluntary and the childcare register as well as the early years register? Which one you want to be on and what that looks like, and timescales and what we do. But also there's a bit of information there about exemptions. So when you don't need to register with us. So it's really helpful, I think, that those pages are there and walked through. So moving on to the next slide. This one is walking through what you need to do for daycare providers and childcare on domestic premises. So it doesn't cover requirements for childminders. For childminders, if you're moving, you just need to tell us and we just change your address on our system. So there's not an approval system there for childminders moving. But every other type of childcare provider here, so nurseries, childcare on domestic, all of the other types need to be letting us know so that we can do an approval visit, or we can come out and check that premises is fine. We won't be doing a full registration visit in those circumstances. So if you're moving provision, if you've I don't know, if you've got somewhere bigger you're moving to, or you're just moving around, people do move, let us know and make sure you've got plenty of notice for us to get that approval visit done, because you need to have that approval visit before you're operating in the new premises. Otherwise you will be operating as unregistered care, which we don't want to happen. You can apply for approval to add new premises to your registration as well, and there's no limit to the number of premises that you can add to your existing registration. So if you want to add more premises, if you're expanding, you're a chain, you're taking on more, you can do that. That's fine. But as I say, give us notice that you're doing that. And I'll come on to it a bit in the next slide, but that kind of timing, actually, if we move on to the next slide, and that'll probably help me to do it. So this talks about mergers and acquisitions. So again, moving premises, but this is covering if you're buying a premise out from somebody else. So you're moving, there's an existing, might be an existing preschool. So they're wanting to resign, you've bought that business. So if you're buying the business from someone who's running, it's how you do that in terms of that continuity of care. And what we recommend is that you apply to register. So there'll be somebody already running that provision, but you're telling us you're going to start running it. You put in your applications to us, we will process all of that. Then once we're ready to grant you your new registration at this new building, the existing provider then tells us, and they resign their registration the same day as you then go live with your new registration, which means there's continuity of care there. It's a bit like when you move house, you kind of that chain of providers when you're doing a house move. It's very similar to that. So legal entities are set out here as well, and when you do and do not have to register. So if you acquire a company that retains the registered person's company number and you continue to trade under your existing company name, you don't have to make a new application. If the sole trader or organisation changes its name and the registered address and the address where Ofsted sends legal documents, but the registered person stays the same, you don't need to re-register that. It's when you want to do a separate legal entity. And I think when we often see that is if somebody's moving from a sole trader, so they're registered in their own right, but they think, actually, I want to be a limited company running this or set up like that, or you become a charitable trust. Those are when you need to re-register because that legal entity has changed from a sole trader to a charitable trust or a limited company, an LTD. But as I say, that first page I showed you on our registration screen walks you through all of that. And there's a wealth of information there on mergers and acquisitions, on moving, on registering, our timescales, how long it takes. And if all that fails and you've gone through all of that and you're still not sure and you've got questions, there is a contact email address on our web pages. So do write to us, give us as much information as you can, set out what you're trying to do, which bits of information you feel are lacking, and we will come back to you and answer all those questions. We really encourage email contact for that because it means you get everything set out in an email. I think it's easy on a phone call, you're trying to take notes and listen to someone and make notes. If you've got it in writing, it's just a lot easier for you to have something to refer back to that's in writing from us. So that some people say it's a little frustrating that we encourage email, but that's why, because it just gives you that really clear audit trail of what you've done and what you're wanting to set up. So I think that's me for my slides.
You're generating lots of questions in the chat, Caroline.
Oh, okay.
So so I don't know if James, you wanted to come back in there.
Yeah, it's no surprise that there's lots of technical questions, so I'll let Caroline take a few moments to catch her breath, having run through them, and have a look at those. I know that you've got a cheeky late slide that was inserted into the deck today, which is a page of lots of links, so that's next. So those are the useful links. So when people get the slides later, they'll be able to click on those. I know some of those questions in the chat were about, well, where do we find these resources? How do we get hold of them? Those links should help really well. So thanks to Lottie for putting those in earlier today. So thanks both. If you're done, I'm happy to start the Q&A process. As I would definitely say, Caroline, have a look at some of those later questions because they relate to registration queries.
Definitely answer some of those, James.
I definitely couldn't answer them myself, so I definitely rely upon you to have a look at that. But we'll give you a few moments to take a break. The next slide just reminds everybody how we invite you to get involved in the discussion now. There's certainly plenty of comments in the chat from this afternoon's session, and I will say that all of the comments that you make, we will be downloading and recording and sharing those with speakers today. So do feel confident that they will be kept and valued and looked at and listened to. There's a lot of you on today's session, so it will be impossible for us to answer every question or comment that has been made. And it is important that we stay on topic, that we address the questions related to the speaker's content. So on the resources that have been shared, on the evidence for PSED, and on the EYFS consultation. But do use the chat function if you can. You can also email us on fy@hempsels.com now or after today's session. I've got the inbox right in front of me here. And you will be getting the online evaluation survey popped in the chat function soon. And that will enable you to rate today's session, but also to make further comments and ask further questions. We'll be sharing that with our speakers as well. So plenty of ways to get involved. And a reminder before I forget, you will get the slides, you will get the link to the recording, and you will get the link to the evaluation survey in an email after today's session. So before I forget, I must thank Ofsted for presenting at today's session. You are great supporters of the Foundation Years platform, online, on the website, in the news flashes, and in person as well, as you referenced, and we very much appreciate it, because like you, we know that the sector likes to engage with Ofsted, DfE and the sector across the piece. So it's a really important part of our mission is to connect, to engage, to discuss and to promote best practice. So let's take the slides down, and I'm going to ask Megan Jarvie back from Quorum Family and Childcare. Megan has been looking at the chat throughout all of those 3 presentations, and will reflect some things back, and I'm interested to see what your take is on that chat, Megan.
It has been a really, really rich discussion. It's been quite hard to keep up to speed with the comments coming in thick and fast through it. So thank you for that. And I would recommend going back through it and really looking at some of the points that have been raised there, because they're really interesting. There's been a lot around the consultation as well. That kicked off a lot of thought and some debate amongst people. Charlotte, I wonder if you could comment a bit about it. It made me think about when there were concerns that were raised about quality and valuing of the sector, about the intention behind the consultation as well, and what was the thinking of the department on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Megan. And I think it's really important, first of all, to note that quality and safety is so important to all of us here at the department, and it's in all of our thinking. But as I mentioned, then the budget saw the single biggest investment in childcare in England ever, which will hopefully remove one of the biggest barriers to working parents by vastly increasing the amount of funded childcare that working families can access. So through this consultation, we want to work closely with the sector to ensure that early years providers are ready and able to offer these new entitlements. As I've mentioned, we know that recruitment and retention of qualified staff is a key issue to the earlier sector, and that's why we're committed to delivering flexibility for providers to help them achieve the ambition of the spring budget investment. So as a first stage of growing and supporting the early years workforce in this way, then that's what this consultation is all about, while also protecting the quality and the safety of settings. That said, then there's also a big range of things in there, and as I mentioned, they all came from conversations with the sector and things that different parts of the sector have told us during meetings and visits that they would be interested in seeing in parts of flexibility, and obviously now we're wanting to test them with the wider sector.
And I wonder, Jade, if you want to come in on the back of that. Jade is Charlotte's colleague from the Department for Education, and you have a stronger focus, or a particular focus, let me say, on workforce issues and qualifications, don't you? So is there anything to add there, Jade?
Oh, thank you, James, and thank you for bringing me in. For those that I have not met previously, my name is Jade Jilks, and I head up the Early Years Qualification Unit to have specific responsibilities around early years qualifications, both in terms of our statutory obligations, but also our entry routes into the sector, so apprenticeships through to EYITT and continued professional development. So yes, quality and a lot of what's been talked about in the chat about professionalisation and of the sector is something that I care very deeply about. I would agree with Charlotte. I think we are in a position where we have had a substantial announcement through spring budget, but also very aware of the challenges that have been facing the sector for some time. And of course, funding is part of that, but there's also a lot of things that we need to consider around flexibilities and what wider support we would need for the sector, in particular around just also the parity of the sector, the way that the sector is viewed in terms of people coming in, but also like the conditions that the sector have and face. And I think this is what Charlotte has already alluded to. This is a first step, and it's definitely an open conversation. And I think we're really keen to make this a success, and that's why, like with lots of these conversations, we're really open to hearing what the sector would really value from DfE in the round.
Okay, that's really interesting. I'll come back to you in a moment, Megan, but I was struck by one comment on on the chat, which I've been sharing and listening and looking at the chat all at the same time. Who knew I could do that all at the same time? But I was struck by one comment about the childminding training, or removing the requirement for childminders to do in training before they become a childminder. And it made me think of driving a car. Because actually, to drive a car, we require somebody to pass a driving test, don't we? We don't require people to have driving lessons. And that seemed to be a sort of comparative example, in that currently we're asking that childminders attend lessons or training or qualifications to become a childminder. We don't think about what their prior knowledge is or their prior skills, which could have been developed in other parts of the sector. Do you think that's a fair comparison, Jade?
Yes, I do. I do think that's a fair comparison, and I would say, like, I think Charlotte said in her slides, that experience and the skills within the sector are really important to us, and understanding the prior experiences that lots of practitioners already hold. And I think there's lots of different questions within the consultation where we're really trying to delve a bit more deeper into what prior experiences do the sector already have that we can really build upon, and the foundations that can help with supporting children. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I think there's lots to unpick there, but I think part of this is really opening up a conversation around the experiences that lots of the sector already hold, and are able to bring those valuable skills when they're supporting our children in these settings.
I suppose to link to what Ofsted was saying, it's the difference between demonstrating practice and knowledge and intent, rather than a folder with something that says I've been on training. So things or Ofsted, no. Megan, any more on quality? Because I think everybody on this call, is included, are very focused on quality and protecting quality.
There was another comment that really stood out to me, actually, which links, I think, really nicely to that driving test example, which is mostly for you, Louise, which was about how can trying to use these evidence-based approaches actually get in the way of being responsive and trusting the instincts of working with young children and knowing your expertise, knowing what you're doing. And I wondered if you had any comments about how to use that in practice, about how to combine both the evidence base with what practitioners really know, and being really experts in their field about how to work responsively with children.
Yes, definitely. I feel really strongly about this, that we have a huge wealth of professional expertise within the sector. You know the cohort of children that you're working with, you know the geographical location that you're working with, you know the challenges that there are for families within your area. So it is really, really important that when we give you these resources as the evidence, but they're used alongside that professional expertise that you have. And so we always talk about evidence-informed practice. So you use the evidence to inform your practice, but it's you're using a huge wealth of evidence, and those resources give you a quick, easy way to access that evidence, but to add to your professional expertise and to support your decision making. So it isn't about implementing evidence-based approaches that are kind of not responsive to children. It's really important that we're responsive to children, but I think if we know what interactions, the type of interactions that really make a difference, I think that's really useful, because we can give a consistent approach for children in our settings, but we're also able to articulate why we do what we do. And I recognise that you will all be very familiar with those approaches. It's not rocket science, it's not new information. It's the evidence that says this is what practitioners, this is what early educators are doing, and this is why we do it, because it makes a difference to children.
Yeah, what occurred to me when I was listening to you, Louise, is that is this whole notion about the sector's understanding and knowledge of child development. The best practitioners, the best settings know about child development. They get it, and they use that knowledge in everything that they do. But I don't go anywhere without somebody saying to me, do you know, there's not enough child development being taught in colleges, and new entries to the workforce just don't have the same grounding in child development than courses seem like they used to. You know, it's when, you know, we celebrate still, don't we, the quality of the NNEB qualification in the sector, because people recognise there was a strong grounding of practice in that qualification and a thorough understanding of child development. So your work and the work of the online child development training from the Department for Education is about actually addressing that new entrant gap in knowledge, I guess, and perhaps I hope you agree, providing the tools and resources for those hardworking leaders and managers who receive new recruits into their settings and think, right, we need to really embed child development knowledge into their practice.
Yes, I think that's really useful to have these tools, resources, where you can see the approaches, you can see the practices, you can step into other people's settings and see what it looks like in different contexts. Because we have so little time, it would be great to take your, you know, new entrants to the profession to be able to go and visit other settings, but the reality is we don't have the time, we have limited resources, limited training, and so if we can provide opportunities to be able to use those resources for training, then, you know, I think it could be useful.
Brilliant. And I think if you're one of those providers or settings and you're looking at what the Education Endowment Foundation has set out as the evidence and the excellent approaches and thinking, yep, we do that, and that's really reassuring and a fantastic thing to think. If you're another setting and think, actually, we could make some improvements in that area, then the resources are helpful. Megan, any more themes coming up for you?
So there's some discussion coming up about the whole consultation process and the discussion process and priority setting process. So I wonder if we could just go over a bit about how some of the feedback from sessions like today fit in with other discussions that you're having with the sector in different places, and how that's all feeding into thinking within the department at the moment. That'd be really useful.
Yeah, and I would add to that, and it'll come as no surprise to Charlotte that I'm going to ask this question, because I ask it all of the time, because the department make a very good point that you are consulting and meeting with all sorts of representatives across the sector regularly. You receive delegations, people, you know, come and see you, they lobby you, they send, but the most common question from, and I can see it in the chat today, is like, well, who is that? You know, who have you been consulting with? Is there a little bit more detail? So it's like, it's that process and how all that wraps up, and what you're taking away and how you're using it, I think is the whole question.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to take that one. So I think the first thing I would like to ask everyone, if you take anything away from today's session, is to go and complete the consultation, as that is how the department can take your views into account on all of the questions that we've discussed today, but also a lot more. As you'll see when I talk through the presentation, there's a lot in that consultation, and we want to know your views on all of it. If you'd like to respond to all of it, you can just respond to the bits that are relevant to you as well, but we really want to get a rounded view. And the reason we want to do that, and the reason why we're doing these engagement events with lots of different people, you know, as James mentioned, I was up in Birmingham the other week speaking to another group of foundation years followers. I'm not sure what the right term is there, but attendees, I suppose. And I think the purpose of the events that we're doing at the moment are really to let people know about the consultation, allow you to ask questions and clarify things as well. I think there's been some things from where I was in Birmingham and I thought, wow, for this session, I need to just update how I'm explaining them to make sure people are really understanding what is in the consultation. But I think the question about who else we're talking to is really valid. We spend a lot of time talking to a whole range of sector bodies. I think people that names you'd be really familiar with. Thinking of the kind of the PACES, the EYAs, the NDNAs of the world, and we're also going along to events that they host for their members to do similar events such as this to spread the word. We also speak to our colleagues at Ofsted a lot, thinking about the impacts on that side as well as individual providers. I'm sure the same can be said for Jade, but I spend quite a bit of time going out to settings, seeing what is going on. And we do that all across the country with lots of different people based in different areas. So we're able to get out to as many places as possible. That said, we can't be everywhere, and that's why I would really appreciate people to respond to the consultation so we're able to get all those views on board and not just of a select few. But Jade, do add anything else if you think I've missed anything there.
That was perfect, Charlotte. And just to say, there are plenty of free text comments boxes in the consultation where you can start to draw the links in between. There's lots of discussion today in the chat that we saw around the timings of the day. There's a specific question asking about what do we class as core hours. So there's lots where you can start to make linkages between the different propositions on the table too. So I just really echo Charlotte's open invitation for the consultation because it's really valuable, and this time is valuable, but it'll also be equally valuable for you to participate in the consultation too.
Okay, cool. And you've even got an invitation from Liz Bolt to attend to visit her setting. So pop your name of the setting, Liz. I've got the list of people that are booked today. I can find you. I'm sure I can find you. But put your details in. Actually, don't put the details in because everybody will see them then. Drop me an email, james@hempsals.com, and I'll fix up a date to see what's possible. And let's bring Ofsted back in. Then Caroline, have you had a chance particularly to look at the questions around registration? And obviously, Wendy, if there's anything you want to come in on, you're completely invited to do that once your camera has unfrozen. You're frozen with your eyes closed at the moment. So let's go to Caroline.
Could be worse. It could be worse. I've had cameras freeze and all sorts of points. Time taken is an interesting one I'd like to start with, if that's okay, because we've done a lot of work in that space because we're really aware the sector is under huge pressure at the moment. You want more childcare places, you want to build on that. So we were at 25 weeks to do a daycare registration. We are now dropping that to around 12 is our commitment to say that we can do that within that time frame, which is quite a lot of time shaved off that in terms of process. There's no checks taken out of that. It's just we've refined things and we're checking and chasing quicker, and we've looked at where we can do things slightly differently to achieve that. So hopefully that helps. I know the ask for a YouTube clip about our EY2 forms, which are our application forms. So yeah, I will take something away and see if we can either do a blog or something on that to demystify those if people are finding those problematic. And another interesting question about, can an LA attend a registration visit? Absolutely, they can. If you want your LA representative there, that's possible. What I will say is we do need to test out your knowledge and understanding to pass your driving test, to use James's analogy here. We don't want them driving the vehicle for you. You do need to be the one answering all the questions and talking to us. But if it's helpful for you to have somebody there, then that's fine. Absolutely, that's fine. And the last one is, there were more in there, but I won't take up all the time because I know Wendy will want to speak. An out of school club under an existing registration. So it looks like you're extending your registration to umbrella an out of school club within that provision. So it's letting us know that's what you want to do. If it's covered by your existing registration, we're not going to approve that. That will come under your existing registration if you are registered to care for those numbers. So check out, you're on the childcare register and the voluntary childcare register as well as the EY register. And if you are, you write to us and let us know you're extending your provision, and off you go. Do some after school care. Fantastic. Wendy.
Hopefully I've unfrozen now and my eyes are open. Oh, good. I wasn't asleep, honestly. Yeah, I don't think there was much more. Just going through, it's really, you know, if there are any suggestions for anything that we could make clearer. I think there was something there about activities for childminders. We can pick up on that. I'll take that one back. That's useful to know. Also, just, I do like, well, I was just going to say an NEB. That's where I started. But anyway, started out in my career. And yeah, just really just trying to get that message out there that, you know, for inspection, we're trying to kind of, you know, that human face, trying to demystify that kind of fear about it, and actually, you know, have the confidence to do what you do every day and don't do any different just because the inspector calls.
The Inspector Calls, great book.
I know.
Okay, that's really useful. Right, I'll open the floor up now if there's any points, particularly any of our speakers would like to raise that sparked your attention, or anything that's tempted you to make a comment. Come back to Megan to see if there's anything else thematically on the chat. But there was a comment saying, well, because earlier I said that we wouldn't be able to address all of the comments because there's so many. As I said, we will be passing all that information on. So if there are things our speakers are able to respond to after today, then we'll make sure that that's shared through the Foundation Years channels. So anything else, Megan, as we start to come to an end to today's session?
I think we've covered all the main themes that were coming up in the chat. That, like I say, there really is plenty there. So I think it'll be really useful feedback for colleagues to take away, for the panel to take away. So please do make use of the last few minutes to make it, give any other feedback for your practice as well.
Okay, and if any of our speakers would like to make a final point, do pop your hand up and I will give you that opportunity. You may feel that you've already said enough. It does feel like we're approaching the end of today's discussion. Fantastic. Okay, so let me remind you what happens next. We will send you an email that has the slides for today's session and the link to the recording in case you want to revisit some elements. We have already put the evaluation online survey in the chat. So some of you, I know, have already started filling that in because I can see it being filled in on my screen. And that will also be on the email afterwards as well. So you can rate today's event and speakers, and you can make more comments about its content and pose more questions. As I said, we'll share the downloaded content of the chat with speakers today as well. You can do more. I mean, Megan's appeal or invitation at the beginning was around getting more involvement. You know, pass details on about Foundation Years events to colleagues. Make sure you're subscribed to the newsletter. We have 2 face-to-face events happening in the autumn, one in Nottingham and one in Manchester. And there's an online one in September as well as some vodcasts on their way, so recorded sessions. We've got one coming up from the Education Development Trust, which reminds you and outlines how you can get involved in the early development programme, for example. So there's plenty to do, plenty to get involved with, and we very much welcome you to do that. So let me just finally say another thank you to all of our speakers, and to Megan, to Louise, to Charlotte, for Jade for supporting with the questions, and to Caroline and Wendy from Ofsted. Brilliant to have you on board and supporting us to engage, to connect, and to promote this practice. That's what we all are here to do, and to ensure that we can embrace and manage change, and we can protect quality and safety of our children in the early years. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a good rest of the day. Goodbye.